Hey Babylon, Nineveh wants its gardens back. Welcome back to the Seven Wonders of the Ancient World. In this episode, we're going to talk about a fabled subject, the only one of the Seven Wonders whose entire existence has been speculated, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. How many of you are familiar with the story of the Hanging Gardens? In 600 BC, Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, noticed that his wife Amytas was homesick. Amytas hailed from the Kingdom of Media, an area that is now Kurdistan province in northwest Iran. Media had lush forest mountains of an astonishing height, green hills, verdant valleys, beautiful vegetation, fragrant plants, cool temperatures, and multifarious fauna, including bears, mountain goats, wolves, and leopards. Amytas had trouble adjusting to her new surroundings, the arid, flat, baking hot deserts of present-day Iraq. To appease his wife, Nebuchadnezzar imported foreign plants from Mesopotamia and Media and began building the gardens on the east bank of the Euphrates River. According to legend, the gardens were built in only 15 days. The best physical description of the gardens went something like this. A ziggurat, or rectangular stepped tower, measuring a total area size of 400 by 400 feet and 80 feet high. The gardens were built on 4 stone brick terraces with vaulted ceilings and balconies made of the same material. Each of these terraces stood 20 feet high. These terraces were connected by an impressive marble staircase and supported by cube-shaped 20 by 20 by 20 foot stone brick pillars. These pillars were hollowed out and filled with soil, which would allow the largest trees to be planted. The foundation platform and terrace platforms were checkered and cube-shaped. They were made of stone slabs layered with reeds, asphalt, and tile. Then the architects topped the platforms off with sheets of lead, so that the irrigation water wouldn't seep through and erode the foundation. For any section they were to plant the trees, they would dump a deep layer of soil on top of the bricks to support the big plants. The first terrace held the big timber trees of the gardens, including pines and junipers of every kind, oriental planes, date palms, and Lebanese cedars. The other trees on this terrace included ebony, North Indian rosewood, Persian oak, Athel tamarisk, Persian walnut, terebinth, weeping willow, European ash, and fir. These specific firs had blue cones. The second terrace held most of the fruit trees and cypresses of different kinds. These fruits included almonds, dates, olives, pomegranates, oranges, lemons, apples, plums, pears, quince, figs, and common grapevines. The last 2 terraces held the assortments of flowers: anemones, tulips, irises, water lilies, lilies of the valley, nightshade, myrtle, sweet flag, henna, spikenard, sweet almond bush, saffron crocuses, cinnamon, and Amytas' favorite, rock roses. The water system that the Hanging Gardens used is complicated to define. The Babylonians used a very complex hydraulic system to haul at least 8,200 gallons of water from the Euphrates River to quench the gardens every single day. The main equipment they used was a cast bronze hydraulic screw pump system. The main screw pump they employed was an Archimedean screw. This was a cast bronze hydraulic screw that raised water using a spiral tube. This was 350 years before Archimedes would supposedly invent this screw, so Nebuchadnezzar was way ahead of his time. They also employed advanced automatic sluice gates, which they would lift to let the water pass through to canals, along with water wheels, dams, aqueducts, and cisterns. The water would eventually be held in a massive holding tank. Then Nebuchadnezzar's slaves would use a shaduf, a manual device to lift water, to deliver the water to the gardens. The gardens stood long after Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BC, until an earthquake around 200 BC destroyed them. So that's the story of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now what if I said that everything I just told you was in fact false? Are you ready to have your mind blown? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were never in Babylon. Much like how people think the Colossus of Rhodes straddled the harbor when it actually stood on a pedestal, people also think that the Hanging Gardens of Babylon existed in Babylon because they are called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. But in truth, its entire existence has been speculated. Many people believe the story to be a myth, and in many cases, they're right. The ancient Babylonians' literature, including those written by Nebuchadnezzar himself, do not mention anything about the Hanging Gardens. So where else would the Hanging Gardens stand if not in Babylon? And who could have built them if not Nebuchadnezzar? In 2013, Oxford University archaeologist Stephanie Dalley went to Iraq to search for the exact location of the gardens. Babylon is present-day Hilla, Iraq, but Dalley decoded an ancient cuneiform text, the language of the Babylonians and Assyrians, for information. She discovered that the location, architect, and time period were all incorrect, so she decided to search hundreds of miles north of Hilla to find the true location of the gardens. Eventually, Dalley's travels led her to Mosul, 328 miles north of Hilla. Mosul is the current city of what used to be Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, and Babylon's deadliest rival. Founded by Nimrod and ruled by King Sennacherib, Nineveh was a dangerous city, racked with religious violence and racism, with a population of 300,000 wicked people. In the Hebrew Bible, God commands the prophet Jonah to go to Nineveh to tell the Assyrians that if they do not repent, God will decimate the city. Fearing for their lives, the Assyrians agree, so God spares them. Despite being near the Tigris River, Nineveh got its entire water supply from Bavion, in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains. This is a mountain chain that runs through Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, but they are primarily located in Iran. The system of 2,700 subterranean canals ran 60 miles south of the mountains down to Nineveh. The main canal was also the longest one, the Kinnus Canal, measuring 300 feet wide and 60 feet deep. It ran for 34 miles and held 79,251 gallons of water. Every kilometer the water traversed down the sloped valleys, it dropped 1 meter in elevation. Mosul today is still a dangerous city. It is still overcome with racism and religious violence, and has been home to several terrorist attacks led by ISIS. Dalley explored the southwest royal palace of Sennacherib on Kuyunjik Hill, where she gathered more clues, including a bas-relief of a similar design to that of the Hanging Gardens, a reservoir large enough to have supplied the gardens, a similar method of getting the water to the gardens, and even the same screw pump, the Archimedean screw. Once again, these guys were ahead of their time, and these gardens were built 100 years before the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were supposedly built. These clues, among many others, confirm that this was the location of where the Hanging Gardens once stood, as King Sennacherib's palace gardens. So the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are actually in the capital city of the sworn enemy of the Babylonians, Nineveh. Dalley came up with this theory in 1992, but needed further evidence to prove it, and almost 2 decades later, she gathered more than enough evidence to back her up. So why are the Hanging Gardens called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and not the Hanging Gardens of Nineveh? In 689 BC, the Assyrians sacked and conquered Babylon. The gates of Nineveh were renamed after Babylon's entrance, since Babylon's gates were named after its gods. Nineveh was even renamed the New Babylon. Also, while there is no Babylonian writing that concerns anything about the Hanging Gardens, there are a few examples in the Assyrian text. In one of them, Sennacherib describes the gardens as a wonder of the world. In addition, the ancient Greeks who described the gardens had never actually been to the gardens, and would often confuse Upper and Lower Mesopotamia. Location and time period aside, these gardens aren't different than the ones depicted in Babylon. Their designs were the same, trees growing on roofed colonnades, as well as their area sizes, heights, and building materials. Their intents were also the same. Babylon's was to replicate Media, while Nineveh's was to replicate Mount Amanus. Their water methods were also similar, mostly using screw pumps and cisterns. These gardens got their water from the Kinnus Canal, and out of 79,251 gallons of mountain water, 9,246 gallons were used to irrigate the gardens every single day. However, these gardens were not destroyed the same way as the ones depicted in Babylon. These gardens were destroyed in 612 BC, during the fall of Nineveh. In summary, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are actually the Hanging Gardens of Nineveh. Well, that wraps up this episode. Tune in for my next one and I will see you then.